The following programming is sponsored by Mark J. Bernstein. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or Peasley Media Group. Entrepreneur, author, and financial consultant Mark Bernstein helps high-performing entrepreneurial business owners create a vision for the future and follow through on their goals and intentions. Ange Honorato is a business growth strategist who blends psychology and business together to create conscious leaders and business owners who impact the world. Founders Forum is a radio show podcast sharing the real stories behind entrepreneurship as founders discover more about themselves while providing valuable lessons and some fun and entertainment for you. Now, here's Mark and Ange.
Good morning, America. How are you? Hey, it's another hot day in Philly. It's always sunny. It's not always sunny, but it's always hot in Philadelphia these days. Although, looks like our first heat wave of the year is coming to an end in the next day or two. Hey, by the way, a little plug for the music at the beginning. That's a song called Should I by Frets, Bridges, and Skins, a band that I put together during the pandemic. And I say that for the benefit of our guest, Ryan Sullivan, who I'm looking at, who I'll introduce formally in a minute, who has some musical background himself. I didn't get a chance to tell him that, so I'm telling all of that. I'm telling that to all of you as well. You can catch Frets, Bridges, and Skins on your favorite streaming service, whatever that is. And the name of the album is called Like Herding Cats. I never plug my own stuff, but I thought it's a good time to do that. So anyway, topic for the day. And we got Ange Honorato here, and we've got Ryan in the studio. And I'm reading a book right now by a guy named Joseph, I believe it's Nguyen. It's pronounced Nguyen. And the name of the book is Don't Believe Everything You Think. Now, just think about that for a second. So, and somebody told me about it in the last couple of weeks, and I've been so busy, I can't remember who. So if you're listening, remind me who you are that told me. But it's a life-changing book, and I'm reading it very slowly. It's a very short book, but I'm reading it slowly, and I have it on Audible because that's how profound I think it is. And the basic concept is that there are thoughts and there is thinking. And thoughts are things that, in my mind, and Ange and I have both done a lot of sort of woo-woo work, as she calls it, woo-woo, and like out there kind of spiritual type work and things like that. And so thoughts are things that are out there in the universe. You didn't create them; they come to you. And when thoughts come in, it's kind of what you do with them as to what influences your life. So if you have a thought. And since I've been reading the book and I've been very aware of this, I observed that thought. I was like, where'd that come from? That's interesting. But that's all it is. It's not positive or negative. It's neutral. If I start thinking about that and thought, wow, maybe that's really true. Maybe the world really is coming to an end. Or, boy, my business is going to collapse because of what I heard about the economy today, or whatever it is. That's when all the danger starts occurring. It's your thinking that does it. And there's a lot more to it. I won't go into it. And in fact, he just came out with a hardcover expanded version, which I'll probably read next. And this is a young guy that wrote this, but he's got, it's sort of, a lot of it comes out of sort of Eastern, sort of Buddhist type principles and things like that, I believe. But I also believe these, the truth, when truth is something that resonates within you when you hear it, and this book is having that effect on me. So that's all I want to say about it. But Ange, I know you must have thoughts about these thoughts about thoughts. So
absolutely, Mark. Wow, this could be a 3-hour
of course
long form podcast on this one very topic, right?
Yep.
But just in a short assessment, my view on this, I think you're absolutely right. Is that thoughts are the things that kind of pop in our minds, but the way that, we can control the actions that we take in terms of how do we continue to think about those things, right? So I think a lot of times it's easy to identify when they're negative thinking patterns, the examples that you just made. But I also think it's a challenge because we've got so many things in media and social media that kind of tell us how to think. And if we don't think the way other authorities do or other influencers, I think that creates a lot of second guessing, a lot of anxiety for us as well. But for me, I think, this is what Norman Vincent Peale wrote about, 80 plus years ago, right? Is the power of how can you change the thinking process and really kind of orient your life in that way. So much more to say about it, but I think I'd love to hear what Ryan has to say, and I think it'll be a good undertone for the rest of the conversation this morning.
Me too. Before I get Ryan's thoughts, I just want to mention last week we had Ed Sattel, and I reminded him of a book he told me about 50 years ago. That's how old I am, Ryan.
A classic. No.
And it was called The Magic of Thinking Big, and it was all about that. And the other thing I'll say, I mentioned Dan Sullivan and the Strategic Coach a lot on this show. That's been a big influence on me. And there's always a section. That of the exercise that we would do when we go away on a quarterly basis to work at the Strategic Coach, and called Thinking About Your Thinking. So like how many people really take time to think about their thinking? So with that, Ryan, what are your thoughts on these thoughts? Thoughts?
I'm a pretty big meditator, so I'm not.
Me too.
Not that I do it. Yeah, I'm not doing it for hours at a time, but I started doing it probably like 6 or 7 years ago, and then I read a book by Sam Harris, which is I think it's called Waking Up. Yeah, it's like spirituality without religion, right? So that book opened me up to this concept that you guys are talking about right now, where there's kind of two types of thoughts, right? You have unconscious thoughts and then you have conscious thoughts. So the unconscious thoughts are the ones that do come in from anywhere, right? You don't really create them. They just seem to happen, right? Then the conscious thoughts are like, think of a red bus, right? Okay, that's a conscious thought because you thought of red bus, then the red bus appeared in your head, right? And so that's the kind of conceptual way to look at it. But what you're saying, and what I agree with too, is that we don't take the time to think about it. But even more so, it does take time to think about it. So even in like mindfulness meditation, say, for example, you're just going to sit down, and that's why a lot of people have trouble with meditation, because they go, yeah, I'm sitting down, but it's not working. Well, it doesn't work. It's not a system.
Right.
It just is.
Right.
Right. So there's a level that you reach where you can start to observe your own thoughts. And that doesn't happen automatically.
Right.
So when we say like, hey, thinking about thinking, most people can't even conceptualize what that is. I'm not saying I'm some expert, but just by sitting down every day for 5, 10, 20 minutes, that's at least personally what I've done to start to think about my thoughts.
I love that. And I'll add one other thing because I just love this subject. I was talking to Ange about this before the show, and golf. Golf.
Oh, don't get me started on how bad I am.
Well, golf to me is a metaphor for life, which is what I love about it. And I'm a high handicap golfer. I'm not a great golfer, but I've always had a love-hate relationship, but now it's an all-love relationship because I realize that it just is. It's just
yeah.
I'll give you a great example. I have a friend who's a coach, golf coach, not a pro or anything, but he's really advanced in thinking about, he studied with a guy named Fred Shoemaker who wrote a book that I'm now forgetting the name of, but it's kind of a revolutionary book written many years ago because it has a lot more to do with your mind and your thinking, although there's a lot of physical aspects of the swing and all that too.
It's a mental game.
But he tries to get you to focus. Everyone has a natural swing, and your natural swing is your natural swing. And how many times have you heard a golfer say, I was thinking too much, or I couldn't get this thought out of my head, or, I had a swing thought right before I swung, and that messed me up. And it comes out all the time. And no offense to most of them, but they don't even know what they're talking about when they say that. It's just like it just pops out like, oh, I had a thought. But the reality is, I know personally when I've played my best golf, it's when I'm not thinking. And this coach friend of mine that I taught, one day I had a match, a golf match I was ready to play, and I said, "You have any last minute tips for me?" I thought he'd say, make a full swing, or keep your eye on the ball, whatever, something like that. He thought about it for a second. He said, "Enjoy the day," and I knew exactly what he meant, and it was absolutely the right thing. And I ended up winning the match, I think, on the 18th hole, because I never got in my head. I was just swinging, enjoying the day. Beautiful day, having a good time. And that's when I have my best golf. And that's when everyone has their best golf, When I have a friend that had 2 holes in one recently, what did you do? I don't know. I just was having a good day and I just got up and swung and it went in the hole. It's like, that's obviously some luck involved in that, but it's just, and isn't that life? The more we can just be ourselves, our true selves, and just, play the game, be in the moment, be in the present. That's the other thing about golf. If you think about your last shot, you're doomed. If you think about your shot after this, you're doomed. All you can do is be in the moment and take a swing, if you're really going to do it. So, and that's such a great metaphor for life, I think. So
it really is.
So it doesn't mean, by the way, no strategy, no thinking about strategy, like productive kind of thinking, but taking a thought from the universe and turning it into something else is what you have to be aware of, I think. So anyway.
No, I'm with you on that. I think, the point of practice is to make it second nature, right?
Right, exactly.
So...
And no more need for thought then, right?
Yeah, hopefully. But
and even if your second nature isn't what you'd like it to be, it is what it is. And if you've ever had any good shots to use golf again, then you can do it again. And that's what Fred Shoemaker talks about in his book.
I think that's the difference between thinking and critical thinking too, right? Critical thinking being very action oriented, strategic. And then you could be Annika Sorenstam, who just hit a hole in one the other day and won a Porsche because she didn't think about her swing.
Oh,
right?
I didn't hear that one. That's great.
It's definitely a good analogy.
Okay, so enough of that. So Ryan R. Sullivan is CEO of Podcast Principles. So Ryan is, by the way, I have to say this, is young. He's 25 years old. Mm-hmm. And I think our youngest guest we've had, which I love. So he's a young entrepreneur, really totally self-started, and that's one of the reasons I really wanted to have him on the show. So he's founder, producer, also a rapper, and full-time CEO. After leaving his job as a mechanic in 2018 to pursue podcasting, he found himself giving free advice on the topic. This led to founding Podcast Principles, another accidental business, a boutique podcast company for B2B founders and marketers. So Ryan, so a little more on your story about how you got to this, being CEO of this company.
Yeah, so it's the origin of the podcast for me. I had been making YouTube videos when I was young because I had a friend who was really good at it, and like back when we were probably like 12 or 13, he would make these like gaming videos on YouTube. So I just copied him, and then I got one that hit like a couple 100,000 views. I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. But at that time, I ended up going kind of into high school, and I was like, this is like nerdy stuff, and nobody's going to care about it, so I just stopped. But that was kind of the start of my media experience, so to say. But fast forward a little bit, I started a podcast in 2018, always thought about it because I've been a huge Rogan fan, which is in good inspiration and bad in other ways, but it led me to starting one.
I know what you mean there too.
Yeah. So, how it is looking at the biggest figure in media, Right. But yeah, so I started that podcast in my parents' garage and just started talking to the camera, webcam, and a mic, and that's it. Got a couple hundred views on the first one. So I'm like, okay, we're getting somewhere here. And I had been at the same time.
What was your topic? What were you talking about?
Yeah. So it was called the Millennial Mind Podcast. And so it was about, because there's now like this whole Gen Z, millennial, like Gen X, whatever, conversation argument that happens. But right. I was trying to just talk about the experience that I was going through at whatever 19 years old. There wasn't really much to it. I would take like Sapiens by Yuval Harari. It's a really good book.
Ah, great book.
Great book in the history of humankind. I would just take that book and just recap something that I read, right? And so that was just I didn't really know what I was doing. Like I definitely didn't know what I was doing. And it was a lot of fun. And at the same time, I'm working as a mechanic because that's what I learned in high school. I ended up quitting sports to do that. Wanted to learn a skill. So I had that skill, was doing that while I was going to community college, while I was doing the podcast. And that was kind of the origin of when I started this. And I really started this whole journey and got onto this podcast and started listening to Rogan and Sam Harris and Tim Ferriss and all these other guys because I kind of hit this moment where nobody was around. Everybody else went to some really good school, state school, and I had not thought about what community college is really like until I was actually in it. And then I didn't have all of my best friends around me anymore, and I'm a really social person. So I kind of went inward, and I'm like, okay, this could go a bad way, right, with a lot of people, that a lot of people that I know have went, right? I could go down that route, or I could try to, get my life together a little bit, even at like 19 years old. So that was the start of my podcast. And then that, I could keep going, but that ended up turning into a hip hop podcast because I worked at a music studio. That hip hop podcast, we started interviewing larger artists and entrepreneurs, and it was an in-person thing. And I had a studio in my garage and all that stuff. So,
believe it or not, we're halfway done this show already.
Wow, that's crazy.
Time flies.
Okay.
So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and then I want to talk to you about some of the challenges that you faced.
Perfect.
Hey there, Philly. Feeling overwhelmed with endless tasks piling up? Meet Cyberbacker Greater Philly, your secret weapon for unstoppable productivity. With us, you get a personal assistant at the fraction of the cost. No employee benefits, no payroll taxes, just efficient, cost-effective solutions tailored to your needs. From social media management to bookkeeping, our diverse services have you covered and provide reliable support whenever you need it. Ready to revolutionize your business? Schedule your free business evaluation today and unlock the power of Cyberbacker. Visit www.virtualleveragesolutions.com now. That's www.virtualleveragesolutions.com. Don't let tasks hold you back. Thrive with Cyberbacker Greater Philly.
We are back on WWDB AM, Bala Cynwyd, Pennsylvania, with Ryan Sullivan, CEO of Podcast Principles. So, Ryan, you were just talking about how you started, sort of accidentally doing a podcast of interest, gathering viewers, and then you built this into a company. Let's talk briefly, real quickly, about what you do in the company, and then I want to talk about the challenges that you've had getting there.
Sure, yeah. So this has evolved from, I worked for one startup marketing company in 2019, came on as a podcast editor, ended up doing the whole podcast, but they ended up taking me off the podcast because they said it wasn't working. I thought that they were the problem, not the podcast, so I left, and that's when I started this business. Fast forward, now we work with mostly businesses, a lot of B2B businesses, but we've also done some consumer work, some celebrity work as well, stuff that's fun to talk about at a party. But in reality, my day-to-day is coaching and consulting and helping people basically make sure their podcast is doing what they want it to do.
Gotcha. So to getting to that point, from leaving your job, starting the company, you have an employee, I know, but you have a lot of outside people. What kind of challenges have you had in terms of moving the business forward?
Yeah, I think it's consistent growth, right? We're doing organic inbound marketing, which we've figured out how to do, but trying to figure out, right, when is that point where you add a channel, right? It's mostly I would say not necessarily a sales problem, but a sales challenge. So scaling, right? Like, I think that's the biggest one. Like, I only worked in small businesses. So when you now grow a business bigger than any of the businesses you've ever worked in, now there's nothing that you can fall back on your past experience. And I should say my past experience. So that's been definitely one of the challenges, but I like the challenge. So
in a minute, we're going to talk about your short-term vision, but if in using your imagination for a second, I haven't asked you this question before, so I have no idea what you're going to say. Where in the future, let's say it's 10 years from now, where do you see this company going? Yeah,
I see it definitely. We've gone from the kind of solopreneur, independent, one-person business owner to the mid-level company. So I see us really taking that next 2 to 5 years to kind of expand and dominate, I guess is a word that we can use, but really spread through the mid-tier. And start working with these companies that are 20, 50, up to 100 employees. And then on a 10-year span, I think we cover the spectrum in terms of anywhere from the solo business owner all the way up to the Fortune 500. That's that long-term vision and goal, just because I know that there are solutions that are we're lacking solutions at every single level. But the thing is, we just got to create a sustainable business model first, and then we can go and serve more people. As I've told you before, we're accidental podcasters, really didn't intend to be here. But
It's working out. We're gaining listeners, and we're expanding the operation. But in the back of my mind, I always think I came up through the music business. We've talked about that. So I went from records to CDs to DVDs to streaming to now So I keep wondering, how long will podcasts last? What do you think about that? With technology changing, what comes next, or are podcasts here to stay?
So if we compare it to the radio, we're like, imagine being like 20, 25 years into the radio. Like Howard Stern's not even on the radio yet.
Right.
So we're 20, 25 years into podcasting. Rogan's the biggest podcaster by number. So technically he's not Howard Stern. Like if we compare them one to one,
right,
there would be somebody even bigger, right? And that's just to say, like, that's just using Stern as an example. Obviously, there's many other people successful in radio. Sure. But that's how I look at it. I mean, I see, if we look at the numbers, right, 40 to 50% of all Americans, essentially almost all ages, or at least adults, listen to podcasts. The amount of podcasts is actually going down. It's been going down since 2020, the amount launched. But the amount of people listening to podcasts goes up year over year. There's only been 1 year in the last 10 years that the amount of people listening to podcasts went down. So the whole medium's growing. It's an accessibility thing, though. It's an and, not an or, right? It's people consume media from the news. They consume it from Twitter. They consume it from TikTok. They consume it from wherever they do. And then they also consume it from podcasts, right? So it's whatever fits your personality style, but I could go into the myriad of benefits and why podcasts have exploded so much. But they are different than the other forms of medium or the other forms of media, especially the independent nature. So I think we're early, but it's also really big.
Well, also one of my observations, and I think you'd probably agree with this, about both radio and the music business as an example, they become different but bigger, and bigger because they're much more segmented. So there will be podcasts for everybody at some point if there aren't already, and everybody will keep expanding. So they'll always be there, and it's a question of how do you access them?
Yeah.
How do podcasters get their word out?
Mm-hmm.
Those are all the things that'll change, and that's a lot of what you're working on, I think.
Mark, I would just say I think it also ties into our topic of the day, right? One of the things I think that a lot of people love about podcasting, myself included, is that you get to tune into podcasts where it can be educational. You can learn things. You're allowed to sort of stretch your own thinking, as opposed to just as the content that, a news organization or a network is pushing out, where podcasts give you that flexibility to experiment with different things, learn different things. It expands the ability to think, right? And I think that's something that, 25 years in, and given the state of the world, I think we're just tapping the surface, to be honest with you. And maybe that's a biased opinion, how I feel about it, but that's what resonates with me, Ryan, as you're sharing kind of where this medium is going.
Yeah, it's still early. I'm totally with you. And that you mentioned essentially accessibility, right? They're extremely accessible. They're free for the most part, and they have when would you get access to all of these people who are being interviewed on podcasts, right? Like, you would never get access to these people. You would have to, if somebody wrote a book about them, but then you would never find the book, right? So it's like accessibility in all forms, consumability. You could be listening to a podcast, and you could go watch it on YouTube, then you could see a clip of it on Instagram, and then you could get an email about that episode, right? Like, it can do everything. So not only from the creator standpoint, but then from the consumer standpoint, that's why they're so big, is because there's nothing else like it.
So podcasts are here to stay. If we're looking at 1 year out from today, Ryan, July of 2025, what would have to happen for that to be a great year for you? Yeah,
so expanding the enterprise part of the business for us, right, which is starting to work with these larger businesses where we can have a 6-month, 12-month, 2-year runway, right? There are, say in the YouTube industry, right, a lot of folks who do what I do, but for YouTube, right? They'll tell you, hey, if you're not going to make videos for 2 years straight, don't even do this, right? With podcasting, we can see results quicker than that. But what I'm saying is, a year from now, I want to have that piece of the business working with businesses who are willing and ready to invest in a podcast in the long term. Whereas before, we've done 30, 40, 50 of these essentially one-off launches that are all successful. But now we have the system to stay with these companies and really build and grow with them. So that's going to be it for the 1 year. What
challenges do you have in getting there?
Longer sales cycle, obviously the sales side in terms of scale. And so that's probably the big one, right? And also,
are you the rainmaker, sole rainmaker?
I'm a rainmaker, yeah. So I do sales and marketing end to end. I run the business. Yeah. And then my partner, Jack, shout out to him. We've been best friends for 11 years. We've been working together for 4 years.
Hey, Jack.
Yeah. What's up, Jack? Love you, buddy. And then the team at Podcast Principles too. But he does the podcast coaching, and then I'll come in and help them fit the podcast into the business and help them monetize it or whatever those other odds and ends around sales and marketing are. So we have our system. We've been doing it for a while, but it's just the beginning of really starting to work with these larger companies where we have a little bit more runway to get even better results.
So for now, for the next year, the expansion's on you. Mm-hmm. Which is fine.
I'm going to hire some more people too.
Yeah, great. Excellent.
No doubt. I'm going to need to.
Sounds good.
I'm excited.
Quick lightning round. We only have 1 or 2 minutes left. Favorite books?
The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. If you're doing anything in a creative arena, even if you're not, even if you just want to get something done, go pick that up. It's like $11. What else would I say?
Another old book, The Art of War.
Yeah, so it's kind of a flip on that a little
gotcha.
bit. Yeah,
Okay.
And then I'll give you one that's not business related, which is Empire of the Summer Moon, that I'm doing an audiobook right now. That's the history of Native Americans in America. Yeah, it's mind-blowing, very graphic, but I'll just give you those two, one on the business spectrum, one on the life history spectrum.
Favorite music? I know you're a music guy.
I mean, I grew up on rock, and I love rock. Probably hip-hop is probably my predominant, but if you look at my Spotify, say, you're going to get everything from country to hip-hop to rock and R&B and soul and jazz. So I'm eclectic. I'm a DJ too, so I love all music, but for me, it's mostly going to be hip-hop or hard rock.
We talked about this when we first met. We're going to do a rock/hip-hop project.
I'm down. I'm ready for that.
We got to do it.
Send me the beats.
Got to get you in my studio. Lastly, what advice would you give your younger self?
I would say work on creative stuff more than the business stuff, especially earlier on. Like, I would have spent more time on music, to be honest with you. Like, I love that I'm doing the business. I like growing it. I'm obsessed with it, no doubt, but it does take time away. And if you think you're going to have 3 passions and be able to work on them all a third, it's impossible. It's not how it works.
Well, take it from me. There's always time more to work on your music. I've come back to it, and it's
I would say don't come back to it. Just try to keep doing
it. Well, keep doing it.
Do the opposite.
I should say I never really stopped.
Yeah,
but I'm able to focus on it more now. I have a little more time.
There you go. Create that balance, right? If you can.
So listen, great to have you here today.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, Ange. Appreciate you guys.
Great guest, Ryan Sullivan. We'll see you all next week on Founders Forum.
Thank you so much.